Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is annexation. Annexation is the new buzzword in the lexicon of Israeli-Palestinian discussions. The word everyone is throwing around. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone from residents of the region to world leaders sitting in European capitals has something to say. Of course, the UN has also weighed in on annexation. Technically, annexation is a legal term, but of late it has taken on political implications and emotional overtones. Annexation actually means forcibly applying the law of one state onto an area in another state. If that area is stateless, the area does not qualify, i.e., it cannot be annexed, and therefore the definition of annexation does not apply right now to the Palestinians. That's an important issue. The area in question right now is called the West Bank. Geographically, it's the area or territory that gets its name from the area on the west bank of the Jordan River. In 1967, during the Six-Day War, the West Bank was taken in a battle by Israel from Jordan. But before that, from 1948, the year the State of Israel was created, to 1967, Jordan did not incorporate the bank into Jordan itself. And even before that, before 1948, the West Bank was a British colony. Israel has been discussing the annexation of the West Bank for a very long time. The discussions have been nothing short of heated. Prime Minister Netanyahu right now, right after being freshly sworn in for his fifth consecutive term in office, decided that that was the time, especially because President Trump is in power. He repeatedly said that his plan is applying Israeli law to major parts of the West Bank. Benny Gantz, Netanyahu's partner in what is now a unity government, has publicly stated that he supports the annexation. If the annexation goes through as planned, it will end the possibility of a two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians. About that, there is no doubt. The Prime Minister actually, and this is an important issue with regard to understanding this, the Prime Minister gave himself a schedule to begin the discussion in the Israeli cabinet itself. He said that he will bring the debate to the government and flesh out the issues starting on July 1st. There's a start date, but only a start date. The Prime Minister gave no deadline for conclusions or decisions. The decision to annex has not been well received by almost the entire world. Vocal, vociferous opposition and a rejection of the idea, let alone the plan, has been widespread. The almost universal critique is that if the West Bank is annexed by Israel, it will not only end the possibility of a two-state solution, it will, most importantly, destroy the possibility of a Palestinian state, period. Three nations are on record supporting Israel's decision after Netanyahu stated his intentions. They are the United States, that was obvious. Second was Austria, and third was Hungary. Interestingly, presidential hopeful Joe Biden made it clear that he is not in favor. Palestinians choose the doomsday scenario. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas officially announced that all treaties and agreements with Israel and the United States are no longer valid, and Palestine is no longer bound by those agreements. Not waiting to see if the government of Netanyahu passes the plan, he declared that the agreements are no longer valid. The United States State Department issued a clear statement saying, as we have made consistently clear, this is a quote, we are prepared to recognize Israeli actions to extend Israeli sovereignty and the application of Israeli law to areas of the West Bank that the vision foresees as being part of the state of Israel, unquote. The statement went on to say that the United States insists that the move be done, quote, in the context of the government of Israel agreeing to negotiate with the Palestinians along the lines set forth by President Trump's vision, unquote. Trump's plan has already been rejected by the Palestinians. Jordan, a close ally of the West and one of only two Arab states to sign a peace treaty with Israel, said that they predict the annexation would be a destructive impact on their relationship with Israel. Of late, the relationship between Israel and Jordan has gone from tepid to downright cold. In an interview with German newspaper Der Spiegel, the King of Jordan, King Abdullah, has said that, and this is an interesting concept. He says, actually, he expresses his concerns, his intentions. He said that what would happen if the Palestinian National Authority collapsed, there would be more chaos and extremism in the region if Israel really annexed the West Bank in July. It would lead to a massive conflict with the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. I don't want to make threats and create an atmosphere of loggerheads, but we are considering all options. We agree with many countries in Europe and the international community that the law of strength should not apply in the Middle East, unquote. That's a quote from Der Spiegel from the King Abdullah of Jordan itself. Abdullah was echoing the sentiment of the European Union, which, while divided on individual relations with Israel, will, according to EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell, quote, use all our diplomatic capacities in order to prevent any kind of unilateral action, unquote. Prime Minister Netanyahu has his own agenda. It is twofold: placating his political allies who feel abandoned by his unity government, and fulfilling his ideological principles by applying Israeli law to areas of the West Bank. As the Prime Minister, Netanyahu has never shied away from controversy. I've also been thinking about Iran and how every year during this season, Iranians dedicate a special day to Israel. The day is called Al-Quds Day. Translated, that actually means Jerusalem Day. It has another name, though. The other name is Destroy Israel Day. Hating Israel is one of Iran's most important purpose. Actually, it's one of its most public statements that it makes both internally and externally. Iranian leadership has a vision. They want to be the leaders of the entire Muslim world, the leaders. They want all Sunnis in the Muslim world to follow their lead. But the Iranians dream big. And given the fact that Iran is a Shiite country, and the vast majority of the Muslim world are Sunnis, this is a very, very large dream. Getting Sunnis to accept Iranian Shiite leadership is nearly impossible, given the history and divisions and massacres, persecutions, and the all-important fundamental religious differences and divisions between them. However, Iran hopes, if they were to have a common cause, better yet, a common enemy, then maybe the Sunnis would follow in line with them, and Iran would and could lead the Muslim world. And that's where Israel comes in. Iran hates Israel. Arab world hates Israel. Iran wants to destroy Israel. Arab world wants to destroy Israel because this hatred for Israel, will desire, and the desire to destroy Israel, is what connects Iran with the rest of the Arab world. Even though Iran is not Arab, they're Muslim, they're Persians, and because that united hatred is strong, then all that divides them might actually unite them. Hatred of Israel may become the vehicle that Iran hopes to use to propel them into greatness and leadership. So Iranian leadership promotes anti-Israel programs, and Al-Quds Day is one of their most prominent and promising programs. It is such an important tool for them that vis-a-vis the Arabic world and the rest of the Muslim world, that it's not only a program in Farsi that we see all over the place, the language of Iran. It's also, their material is also presented for Al-Quds Day in Arabic. Also, you should know that it's also in English, which is important too. That's so that I know, and people like me and you know what's going on. They're not hiding this. Iranian Al-Quds Day of 2020 was scheduled right in the middle of the coronavirus restrictions and social distancing. That shows how badly official Iran hates Israel and how much they want to rule the Muslim world. The Iranian Revolutionary Guards, and this is important because they're the ones who actually organize the rallies. Hundreds of cities and towns throughout Iran rallied participants in cars, not marches. They went out in cars, and no one outside their cars. There were virtual rallies online, speeches in each town and city. The people of Iran hunkering down at home because their stay-at-home policy said they had to stay there, were still able to show and participate and vehemently express their hatred towards Israel on this special day. Burning flags is a very popular tradition. Burning flags, say, a popular tradition and a form of protest in Iranian cities. But they can't be outside, they can't burn flags. So American flags and Israeli flags were actually burned, but they were burned because of the corona restrictions virtually. The organizers were very creative. So in place of the flags, they simply used fire as a substitute symbol for their hatred online themselves. So they burned the flags virtually on the screen. And then the Ayatollah added a new twist to the day. In an extreme move, extreme even for Iran, the Grand Ayatollah commissioned a poster that was then posted on his website, his personal website, and then sent out online and hung throughout the country. The poster was plastered all over Iran. The poster reads, "Palestine will be free. The final solution, resistance is referendum." Now, the final solution is a very clear reference to Hitler and to the Holocaust. After Jewish leaders reacted and expressed their feelings about Holocaust reference, the Grand Ayatollah clarified his poster's message. He said that he did not mean killing all Jews. He said just Israeli Jews. The poster was on the front screen of the Ayatollah's website. The message was written in Farsi, Arabic, and also in English. Clarification was not necessary. There was no misunderstanding. The message was perfectly clear. This is not the first time Iran has toyed with Holocaust references. They have sponsored conferences rejecting the Holocaust. You remember the cartoon contests. We've actually discussed them here on air. They've done several of those cartoon contests in order to reward people for embracing the idea of Holocaust denial. Iranian leadership knows full well that the history of the Holocaust happened, that there was a Holocaust. They know full well about the European history. But history here is not the same as what we're talking about. We're talking about them contributing to a conspiracy theory that says that it did not happen, because that thesis is very popular in much of the Muslim world. And by rejecting the Holocaust and pledging to murder Jews, Israeli Jews and all Jews, Iran is hoping to get more and more support for their leadership of the Arab world and the Muslim world itself, the entire Muslim world. Iran is fighting an uphill battle in the same way that the people tend to shout louder when they are losing an argument. Iranian leadership is increasing their rhetoric against Israel because many Muslim countries have done the same. Traditionally and historically, hating Israel, the hatred of Israel, have of late changed the course and their course with regard to what's going on in the Middle East itself and around the Muslim world. And they're uniting with the United States, their other archenemy, and Israel together, the United States and these other Muslim countries, against Iran. So Iran is increasing their online presence because they have finally learned that it is the only way to reach youth around the world. And because more and more Iranian youth have let it be known that they don't subscribe to the ideas of Iranian leadership. We have an interesting conflict emerging. Iranian leadership typically thinks things through, but not now, not in this case. Hatred of Israel is what stokes their fury, but it is not, and this is important, a burning issue with enough of the rest of the Muslim world. Next up, points of view. The first column I want to talk about is actually a piece from the Jerusalem Post. It's a column. It was published on May 25th, 2020, and was written by Rabbi Abraham Cooper of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. It was originally posted on Media Line. Until recently, I ran a weekly radio spot on Media Line. I ran it for 20 years, actually. It was a very significant piece. They are a platform dedicated to delivering Middle East coverage without bias, and they are enormously successful at it. So it's important to just get a sense of that. The column is entitled Ayatollah's Unhinged Jew Hatred, Mocking Germany's Never Again Pledge. It's subtitled, and it's a long subtitle. You can do this online. German leaders are unmatched in the eloquence with which they commemorate 6 million dead Jews. But that strong voice is mostly absent when threats are made against Jews in Israel. Accompanying the piece is a wonderful cartoon, which connects to the piece itself. So this piece is a combo of the cartoon and column together. An interesting note, you should know, that once upon a time, political cartoons always accompanied columns. Now cartoons stand on their own, actually totally independent of cartoons, which is interesting too. A new era. Rabbi Cooper begins his column by showing that Germany is making amends for the Holocaust. He writes, "I was present in Jerusalem this January when leaders from the four corners of the earth gathered at Yad Vashem to mark the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp. There were many important moving speeches. None more moving than the emotional one delivered by German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier. Cooper continues, he admitted that his nation had not fully learned the lesson of the Holocaust, even as Jew hatred was still growing. Steinmeier reiterated that Germany assumed full responsibility for the Nazi genocide of the Jewish people. But Iran, and this is important, has been promoting Holocaust denial in unparalleled ways of late, and Germany has been absolutely silent about it. So Cooper offers an example. He writes that just hours after Germany issues these announcements about the Holocaust, Iran responds. The column continues. Within hours, another vicious anti-Semitic cartoon, a Holocaust, a lie, was posted by the Iranians. The Germans do not challenge Iran on this at all. Cooper argues that Germany does not want to offend Iran because they want to preserve their partnership in trade. He concludes by writing, so when it comes to Iranian genocidal Jew hatred, it seems that Germany is trying to balance never again and euros, that is the dollar, über alles, overall. He continues, and this is his final line, with the Ayatollah's increasingly unhinged bellicose threats against Israel and the United States' commitment to continue ratcheting up sanctions on Tehran, Germany may be forced to choose one side or the other. Rabbi Cooper might be correct. It might be about money. So I ask, if that is the case, and they are not fighting Holocaust denial because of monetary profit, then that raises a serious question, an ethical question, about the veracity of their Holocaust apology. Are they truly sorry? Next up is a column by Daoud Kutab. It was published in Ynet on May 22nd, 2020, and is entitled, Trump Peace Plan Risks Upending Israel's Treaty with Jordan. It's subtitled, Analysis, the Hashemite Kingdom's total rejection of prospective Israeli annexation in the West Bank is not only due to its violation of the 1994 peace agreement, but also because its direct impact on the stability of its own dynasty. This column was originally run again on Medialine and then presented to Ynet. Now, this is interesting. Kutab is the most famous of all Palestinian columnists and writers. He's a columnist. He comes from a very prestigious and famous family in the Palestinian world. I have known him for about 26 years. I have great respect for him, even when we disagree, and we often disagree. So it's important to get a sense of this idea. The title of the column is misleading. The column is not about Jordan and Israel. The column is really about setting the stage for world condemnation of Israel after the annexation. Kutab begins. The first public statements by the new Israeli foreign minister caught some people off guard. Gabi Ashkenazi described U.S. President Donald Trump's Middle East peace plan as an historic opportunity to shape Israel's future borders. He said that the proposal, which envisions Israel's annexation of about 30% of the West Bank, would be advanced responsibly, while highlighting the need to safeguard the country's alliances with Egypt and Jordan. Ashkenazi and others may believe that they can implement the Trump plan and still maintain peace with Cairo and Amman, but that's wishful thinking. Israel's alliance with Egypt and Jordan is based on a trade-off. And that's the end of his quote. It's a very insightful one. But Kutab argues that the entire balance will be destroyed and it will come to tumbling down because of the Israeli and U.S. arrogance with regard to this plan and in general. He concludes by laying out a plan of how the Arab world will react to the annexation. And this is how he writes it. Quote, as the first Arab country to become a member of the International Criminal Court in The Hague, Jordan will not hesitate to pursue legal recourse against Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Benny Gantz, Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi, and the entire Israeli leadership will be accused of perpetrating war crimes if Israel presses forward with the Trump peace plan. Any such move will be viewed as the theft of Palestinian lands, and those responsible will have to pay for their actions, unquote. The Uqtab is probably correct. Israel will be condemned, maybe even by the World Court in the Hague. That seems obvious because that happens regularly. The question is how big the price will be for Israel to pay. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to show 4 cartoons today. The first cartoon is from the Daily Dose of Laughs. It's a hilarious collection. And it's a crayon scribble of a preschooler filled with scribbled lines and color all over. The caption reads, "Found a copy of the government plan to reopen the economy. Not sure if it's state or federal." It doesn't matter if you're conservative or liberal on this issue. This cartoon touches all of us. The reality is that there is confusion swirling around us, and we will be laughing and crying about this for a very, very long time. Next up is a Pictoon, a picture with a caption in it. The picture is a Purell dispenser of sanitizing cleanser, and it calls the dispenser a paper cut locator. How true. This, by the way, will be our status for a very, very long time. For the foreseeable future, we're going to be using things like Purell to cleanse our hands all the time. Every time we walk in, every time we go out, every time we put something on, certainly every time before we touch our faces, we'll be using sanitizers. Funny thing is that we often have no idea that we even had a cut on our fingers until we use Purell or a sanitizer. Third up, actually, is a headline. The headline comes and actually explains another tension that's been emerging. It's sort of a conflict here. The third idea is it's not a cartoon, remember. The discussion is about many prisoners who have been released because of coronavirus, but they've been rearrested once they've been released. The headline reads, "Over 100 inmates released from Rikers, busted for new offenses." So we're letting them go only for them to commit crimes. Many of them are arrested again and put right back in. Finally, the beloved Three Stooges. This is our fourth. The Three Stooges are used to make fun of Facebook and their fact-checking skills. The Three Stooges are at the chalkboard in school looking at a simple math equation, and they're congratulating themselves for completing it successfully. 2 plus 2 equals 3. They shake their hands in great celebration. Caption reads, "Facebook independent fact checkers. Hard at work." It is true. It is funny. It's hilarious that Facebook is doing this. They're doing such a poor job of it. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Millions of butterflies have descended into the butterfly garden in Eilat. The butterfly garden was created in 2018. It sits in the bird reserve just outside of Israel's southernmost city on the Red Sea, which is Eilat. And it is a gathering point, by the way, of thousands upon thousands of bird watchers from around the world who come to see the birds. But now people are going to start coming to see the butterflies also. People from all over the world come to see the stunning colors of these fluttering butterflies and their wings. Every year, butterflies use the garden as a place to rest, just like their bird partners as they migrate from Africa to Europe. The butterflies migrate as much as 9,000 miles. No single butterfly makes the entire trip. Migration can take 6 generations of butterflies to complete. This is another example of how Israel has become a world capital and a magnet, not just in technology and biotech, but also for those interested in studying, watching, and admiring butterflies. Coronavirus is one of those strange things that touches all corners of the world. We tend to focus on where we live and where our loved ones are located. But there's a ripple effect, which is important, and we have to pay attention. The world is big, and we should pay attention to where other things are being impacted and how that impacts our lives through the ripple effect itself. Argentina has closed themselves off from the world. No commercial flights in or out. This has had a huge impact on their business, on their exports, obviously. Argentina is the 5th largest exporter of meat in the world. Israel, by the way, is their third largest client, buying over $100 million in kosher meat from Argentina every year. But Corona, in order to certify that that meat is kosher, before Corona, teams would go to Argentina, teams of rabbis would go to Argentina and ritually slaughter the meat. And they would travel to Argentina and properly kill the animals according to Jewish law. And then the rabbis would remain in Argentina for about 3 months doing it all and then return home. But after COVID, after the outbreak, the rabbis were not permitted into Argentina. Now that's changed now, but that actually means a huge impact on Israeli meat consumed by the country of Israel, as well as the exports of Argentina. They might drop from the top five. So what happened is the government of Argentina said that they would co-sponsor a private jet to bring the rabbis in, and that would be permitted to land by the government. And the rabbis prepared the meat for kosher certification. This will help keep the supply of kosher meat at full capacity, which is very important and which is good for Israel. It also means that Argentina will remain in their position as the fifth top five of the world's exporters of meat. This is good news for Argentina. The Palestinians next refused coronavirus aid from an Arab country, no less. Why would that be? From the United Arab Emirates. Why refuse the aid? Why refuse 16 tons of aid that includes ventilators? 10 ventilators were a part of it. It's simple. If you're a Palestinian, it's simple. The aid was flown from Abu Dhabi to Tel Aviv on Etihad Air, the first ever commercial flight from the United Arab Emirates to Israel. Palestinians rejected the aid, saying, "We refuse the aid from the United Arab Emirates because it wasn't coordinated through us or any of our systems." At a press conference in Bethlehem, the Palestinian minister, Micah Halpern, put it this way: "We are an authority and have our sovereignty, and we cannot accept such aid without coordinating through us." The Palestinians keep making mistake after mistake after mistake, and this is important. Because what happens is, because it was an official flight into Israel from an Arab country recognizing Israel's existence, the Palestinians rejected that. It's a big problem because it's showing the trend moving away from Palestinian interests. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. I spoke about mistakes, about making mistakes. All leaders in governments make mistakes. Some make them more often than others. Only history tells whether the decision worked out well or didn't work out well. The reality is now the Palestinians are making decisions based on pride. And as a result, they're going to be making mistakes. They're attempting to get the entire package of what they want. There are many flaws in the Palestinian perspective and how they approach Israel and the United States, but the most significant error is that they actually want everything that they're asking for. And each item is a deal breaker because of that. There is no compromise. Abbas, and by extension, all Palestinian leadership, feels that any compromise would destroy their legacy and even endanger their lives and the future of the Palestinian nation. It brings to light one of the most famous lines ever spoken by Abba Eban, the great Israeli diplomat, thinker, and historian. Eban said, "Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity." Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.